Hey, life can change in an instant. One minute everything feels normal, and the next someone else's mistake turns your world upside down. That's when you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers, they dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something we love. They're a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they care about this community and the people who call it home. So if you've been hurt or someone you care about has, pick up the phone, call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. And from United Healthcare, with a network of over 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide the care you need when you need it. That's why United Healthcare has been working to make the healthcare system work better for you, making your care more coordinated, more personal, and easier to access. At United Healthcare, your care is non-negotiable. Learn more at uhc.com/Hopkins/FAQs. Today on CityCast DC, hey, listen, do you spend much time thinking about trees? Yeah, me neither. All I know is DC's got a lot of them, but it turns out that our treescape has undergone some really radical changes lately. And thanks to climate change, there are more in store. It's going to affect what colors you see in the fall. It's going to affect what's growing on your block, and it's going to affect what's growing under your sidewalk. The Washington Post's Marissa Lang and John Harden worked on an epic report on Washington's trees, and they are here to explain how it all works. Today is Thursday, November 6th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for being here. Hi, Marissa. Welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
So you guys, we tend to think of DC as a super green city, right? If you look at it from above, and we're always like way high on rankings of parkland and so on. That hasn't changed. But you guys wrote this really fascinating piece that suggests the specifics of it have changed. How have they changed?
It's interesting with a lot of the changes that you see with the climate. You know, some trees do better in warmer weather, some do not. And so DC has been working to introduce trees that are like a sturdier stock that can handle some of those warmer temperatures, those long periods of no rain. And so even though you don't necessarily see that difference, because when you look at a tree, you just see bark and you see leaves, right? But when you look a little bit closer, that's when you notice some of those differences, whether it's like height or root depth, or even like the change in the foliage in the fall.
So can we jump back to the beginning here? I'm curious how DC became so green. So what was here before humans? And were there the kinds of trees we see around now? If not, what was here? And how did it evolve to the city we know?
So DC is what a lot of arborists will refer to as like a hardwood forest. That means that there are a lot of big, tall trees, oaks, maples, right? The kinds of trees you do see now. A lot of them have lived in the region for centuries or millennia. And
they definitely have 202 area code on their phones.
They definitely have a 202 area code for sure. I mean, the truth is trees, when they migrate, so to speak, right? If they move from place to place, it happens so slowly. It happens over hundreds or thousands of years because the natural way that happens is they have to be, their seeds have to be carried somewhere else by a bird or by, the natural cycle of how things move from place to place. And that happens really, really slowly. And then they have to adapt to the region. They have to adapt to the soil. They have to take root. They have to grow. So the trees that we see here today, by and large, many of them have existed here since before Washington, D.C. was Washington, D.C. But what John and I delved into in our piece about trees is that the way this is changing is happening at sort of hyper speed because of human intervention.
So what happened between, the founding of this place as a city and now is, over these years, streets got subdivided, developments got built, houses got built, people came and planted trees in their backyards, or developers planted them along the new roads that they had laid out. Were they planting things that were already here, or were they importing what was then new stuff?
A little of both, actually. They were planting things that were just like native here, but they also planted things based on aesthetics. And that's why we have so many maples. They just love the look of the maple trees, right? So if you look at Northwest DC, you'll see kind of like a lot of the same type of tree. And a lot of that was just based off aesthetics.
Also, I think this idea of what is considered native is actually a fairly new phenomenon. Like people are newly aware of the idea that maybe we should be prioritizing planting things and plants and species that are actually from here, that are native to this region, that are native to this climate. But for a long time, folks who were just putting a tree in their yard were not really investigating the nativity of a plant, and nor did they have the resources to do so at their fingertips. I think the internet has changed a lot of that. I think people's awareness and wanting to have things that are more localized has become more prominent. But there's
Wait, what's the argument for planting a native tree versus some other tree? Is it just xenophobia?
I mean, some of it is that, yeah. But also that they'll do better. There's a lot of really subtle ways that plants adapt to a place. We didn't actually get into this in our piece, but ask me about soil fungus, right? Like there's a lot
I can't wait.
There's a lot of things that adapt and sort of coexist with trees. And some of that are these microorganisms like fungus that literally lives in the soil that have this symbiotic relationship with plants. And so you have these things kind of co-evolving with the plants, which means that a native species of tree or plant or shrub is predisposed to do better because the soil and what lives in the soil and the birds and the bees and all of these other organisms have co-evolved with those species. So the likelihood that it will live long and be prosperous and do well and all of these other things increase if they're a native plant variety, actually. And also there's a growing awareness of, not planting invasive species that will just absolutely take over the surrounding area to the detriment of some of the other plants around it. So I think for a long time, people just didn't know. And they were like, this looks cool. This is pretty. I like it. I'm going to stick it in my yard. And now I think there's been a growing movement toward let's plant native, let's not plant invasive, or let's get rid of invasive species.
So your guys' piece really focused on what you had said about this like hyper speed evolution of trees. And I use that term advisedly because I don't think even a hyper speed tree evolution is that fast. But tell me, what is different in the Washington treescape for me as a person out walking his dog or something than it would have been, 15 or 25 years ago?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that a lot of people probably miss that, some of those changes because DC can just be so transient at times. But I think that a lot of the species that they are planting now are a lot taller. So you might see a lot of those taller trees. So in that analysis that we did, we saw a lot of the trees that were prioritized in the past, like the average height would be like 70 to 80 feet, and that's like the upper range. But now they can reach even 10, 20 feet above that. So you might see a lot of just towering trees. And there's like benefits to that, more shade, reduces like the heat island effect, those kind of things. And then also one of my favorites is just the color in the fall. This is where you might notice it the most, right? So with the introduction of like a lot of the maples, like DC kind of had like this fiery orange like treetop, right? But slowly but surely it's becoming more golden and yellow. I spoke to the city about if that was like an intentional, planting or like something that they wanted to do on purpose. And they said no, but the data just like supports kind of like this golden canopy. So you might not notice like a lot of these differences just your day to day, but in the fall you might.
The other thing that I would add is just the types of trees. I know a lot of folks are not tree experts, and that if you're looking at, a willow oak versus a pin oak versus a bur oak, you're not necessarily going to be able to identify which is which, unless you're someone who loves trees and knows exactly what leaf looks like which. But if you're someone who travels to other states in the U.S., you might start to see trees in the district that you hadn't seen before that maybe you've noticed elsewhere. I'm thinking of certain types of conifers, so trees that are green all year long, certain types of magnolia trees that are really prevalent in the South. Mississippi loves its magnolia trees. And there are certain species of trees that if you've been to states along the southern Gulf Coast or in the Midwest, in cities like St. Louis, that you might see along streets there that now you're going to start seeing here. And you're going to see less trees that look more like Northeast streetscapes. So, for example, the sugar maple, which really thrives in New England and sort of the upper Northeast, is getting deprioritized, is really starting to die off. So we're going to start having trees that resemble more southern and Midwestern states, and that might, recall those places to you as you're walking around and walking your dog.
Wait, so who is doing the prioritizing or the deprioritizing? I mean, who decides what we're going to plant?
The city and all their arborists. The city has maybe 8 or 9 zones, and these arborists go to each tree like a doctor, checking up on them and see which ones do well, which ones do not. And it's kind of like up to them to figure out if the health of the canopy is up to par. And if not, based on all of these changes, whether it's like rain patterns, heat, soil, they'll create a list of like which trees are doing well, which ones aren't, which trees we should keep, which ones we should bring in. And so over the years, they've kind of been putting this list together. And in 2021, they came out with this list of maintain, promote, reduce. Mm-hmm. And they kind of like cast a net across like the country too. Like, okay, these are the conditions that we're seeing in DC. What other state, what other region kind of mirrors this? Mm-hmm. And that was, when I spoke to them, they were like, you, like Marissa said, in DC, we're beginning to mirror places like Missouri, for instance, places that get a lot of rain, but also have like these long periods of no rain. And we need trees that can like survive that. And so that's kind of how they put the list together, looking at DC and then looking at cities that mirror kind of like those environmental patterns.
DC is pretty unique in that it has an urban forestry division. Not all cities have one of those. And so the team of arborists that John is talking about, this is their full-time job. They actually work to manage the green space, the trees in the urban center of the district. And that's, I think, something that a lot of cities are moving toward. But DC has had an urban forestry division for a long time and has, put a lot of effort and energy and money into its trees.
One of the things I noticed in your guys' piece was, there was some concern about whether the city is getting enough new trees to make up for the loss of trees, to balance things out. But it was like 8,000 was the number they were looking for. Does that mean that 8,000 trees have been cut down or died in the last year?
That is a possibility. It's hard to really nail down how many trees they are losing versus how many they are planting, because there's this push in DC for development, right? There's kind of like these two different ideologies. It's like we want to grow, but then to grow, we have to excavate. We have to like remove these trees. And so we have to chop down trees. So there are trees on private land. A homeowner can chop down a tree, right? A construction crew can chop down the tree. And so the city is trying to keep pace with that loss, right? And then on top of that as well.
But that seems like a huge number. They're really like that seems like we could start a paper mill or something.
Well, they're also trying to grow, right? And I think the number that John and I were able to glean was like on average, the city is losing somewhere in the ballpark of 2,000 trees annually. But they want to grow the canopy. They want there to be more. So to keep pace with that, and as John was saying, to kind of advance past it, they need to sort of overplant. Also knowing that not all of these saplings are going to make it. You put a young tree in the ground and it has to survive the transplant process. It has to survive its first summer of heat and perhaps drought. It has to survive like all of these different things. And there's a lot of young trees that are new that don't reach maturity. And so they're kind of hedging their bets when they put new trees in. So they end up with these full mature trees ultimately that will contribute to the canopy and actually progress them toward that goal. Because a new tree that's just like my size, I'm 5'5", is not really contributing to the canopy.
Except for very small people.
Except for very small people, yeah.
I mean, the impetus for all of this thought is that the climate has changed in ways that may make the kinds of trees people used to plant here not do so hot.
Pun intended.
Indeed.
That's exactly right. The climate is getting warmer. The weather patterns are getting more erratic. John mentioned the drought and the rain aspect, that DC is becoming a place whose weather patterns trend toward these periods of dryness. So it dries out the soil. It will be more of a drought condition. And then this deluge of rain. And that's why we've seen a lot of flash floods in some of the suburbs and even parts of the district. And so for some trees, a big flood like that will kill them. It'll just saturate their roots. They won't be able to handle it. And, that is part of it. The other part of it is urban development. DC is a rapidly developing city. It's a city that's dealing with a housing crisis, that is constantly trying to build up and out and more and denser. That is a risk factor for a lot of these trees too, either because they're getting pulled out by construction crews and to make room for things, or because the very act of development impacts the soil and creates these conditions that could kill trees.
Stories matter at St. Anne's Center, where mothers and children can overcome homelessness and write hopeful new futures. Founded in D.C. in 1860 and chartered by President Lincoln, St. Anne's Center continues to help women and their children today, 165 years on. Now, we invite you for a one-of-a-kind look inside our mission. Visit stanns.org/CityCastDC to watch In Her Words, an exclusive short film highlighting 4 women currently journeying through St. Anne's Center. This 6-minute film explores motherhood, homelessness, and hope through the eyes of the women living the journey. Hear their stories in their words. You can also learn how to support St. Anne's by advocating, donating, or volunteering for the mission. Make a difference this Homelessness Awareness Month. Visit stanns.org/CityCastDC.
And from United Healthcare. At United Healthcare, your access to care is non-negotiable. With a network of more than 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide you the care you deserve. With open enrollment season here, you can trust that United Healthcare is working to ensure you can access the care you need, when you need, where you need it. Learn more about United Healthcare's commitment to patients at uhc.com/hopkins/FAQs. And from United Healthcare. At United Healthcare, your access to care is non-negotiable. With a network of more than 120 hospitals and nearly 40,000 physicians across the DC region, United Healthcare is proud to provide you the care you deserve. With open enrollment season here, you can trust that United Healthcare is working to ensure that you can access the care you need, when you need, where you need it. Learn more about United Healthcare's commitment to patients at uhc.com/hopkins/FAQs. All right, so help me nerd out for a second. I am rather an indoorsman. I don't know my trees, but you've mentioned some of the new species of trees that are being planted, some of the ones that are out. How do I identify them? Can you give me, at least as best you can, speaking out loud, a sort of field guide to trees and how regular people can figure out what they're seeing when they walk around?
That is a tough question. I'm curious to see what you would say, Marissa. So a lot of the trees, how would you identify them? a lot of these trees are in the same family. Like you have like the southern maple, which is kind of like a relative of like the red maple. And so the leaves and barks are very similar. The leaf size is different. So really to figure out you probably have to bring out a ruler and measure, or unless you're just like good at eyeballing it. I'm curious, what would you say, Marissa?
I would say a couple things. So I actually did a ride along with an arborist for this story. So I got to really nerd out and like learn how to pick out trees. And it's been a thing I'm doing now on my dog walks where I will walk under a tree and be like, I think I know what this is. And there's no one there to tell me I'm wrong. So I'm right 100% of the time. But I would say that as a base level field guide, leaves are one of the easiest ways to identify tree from tree. One of my favorite trees to pick out now that I've clocked as a tree that the city is trying to promote is a willow oak. They look really different than your traditional oak trees. You know, most oaks have these sort of tapered leaves that are like wide at the top. They have these sort of ridges, and then they come sort of to a narrow base toward the stem or toward the branch. Willow oaks have these really lovely little oval kind of oblong leaves, and they have a lot of them on a particular branch. And they also have these really, I think, very cute little acorns. And so they're oak trees, but they kind of don't look like other oaks. And they are one of the trees that the city is trying to plant. The other thing I would say is just in the different neighborhoods, trees are going up and down all over the city, but we were able to analyze the data that John had collected and sort of pull out specific neighborhoods where you have a greater likelihood of seeing the trees that are either going to be in the promote list, the maintain list, or the reduced list. If you live or are walking around a neighborhood with a lot of development, I'm thinking like Navy Yard or Noma, you are more likely to see the trees that are in the promote category because they're being planted. They're newer because of all the development and all of the changeover. You have a lot more young trees. The other thing I will say, and this is like a cheat, but if you're walking around and you see a sapling, especially one of those that has like the green bag at the base to kind of keep the water in, that's like really new, there's probably a tag on the tree that tells you exactly what the tree is. So you can actually walk up to that tree, look at the tag, and see what kind of a tree it is. And if you're curious to know if it's in whichever category, you can cross-check it. Actually, in the course of reporting this story, one of the trees featured in our piece is this old maple that died a very sad death in upper Northwest, and then it was replaced by a sapling. And I went back to try to figure out what sapling it was, and I was curious if it was one of the trees the city was trying to promote and if it would like fit all of these features that the city wants, you know, taller, drought resistant, etc. And no, it's a flowering dogwood. These are like fairly small, very pretty trees that live a moderate but not a very long life. And it's just going to be like a very pretty tree with pink flowers. And I did not do a lot of like leaf identification for that. I looked at the tag on its branch. So
we're about to get 250 new cherry blossoms, apparently. How do they fit into this equation?
Yeah. So we should start. There are two different agencies that take care of trees. There's the treescape, which is like more city maintained, but then there are the federal trees like Rock Creek Park, the cherry blossoms. So the cherry blossoms, as Marissa and I always call them, they're like DC's darlings. Everyone wants to see them, so they have to be there no matter what. Even if the earth was on fire, there has to be a way to keep them there. With the warming temperatures and floods, they don't do so well in that. And so it will be interesting to see what that looks like in 15, 20 years. Like, will they have to move them elsewhere outside of the basin to help their roots grow and not get so inundated with water? Like, how do you create a canopy above them to keep them shaded? It's a very interesting, I think, area to explore, because when it comes to those, I mean, they're always on the promote list, I think, for the federal agencies.
And by all measures, like, they should not be doing well in a warming climate. You know, we remember Stumpy, R.I.P. Stumpy, like Stumpy was a casualty of climate change. And that does not seem to have affected their numbers. When John and I looked at the data and looked at the trend lines, cherry blossom trees are doing great. And that is not because they've somehow adapted to the climate. It is because there is a real intentionality in making sure these trees are doing well and are maintained and are going to be pink and white and beautiful in the spring. So I would just say, like, if you're worried about the cherry blossoms, don't, because everybody else is worrying about the cherry blossoms.
Because it's DC, I got to ask. One of the great irritations of living here is summertime storms that knock over trees, that knock out your power because the electric lines are above ground. In the thinking of the arborists when they decide what they want to promote or not, does robustness in the face of summer storms factor into their calculation?
Yeah, I believe so. Like a lot of the trees that they want are some that have like a lot deep roots. It's a tree that's a little sturdy, like a tree that probably can handle like very high winds.
Also, the health of a tree will determine how it will do in a storm. Like if you have a tree that's healthy and strong and youthful, has a lot of vigor, right? Like it's not going to snap quite as much. Whereas an older tree or a sick tree, those are the trees that are going to drop branches much more quickly.
So one of the things I've noticed just this year, and again, I'm not much of a garden figure, but there look like there are a lot of sick-looking trees around. And I don't know if this is the lanternflies or just sort of climate change or anything, but it's the kind of thing that it seems remarkably different this year versus last year. That may just be wherever I happen to hang out. But is there something going on that people should know about?
It's definitely partly climate change. I think that this past year, even into last year, there were a lot of really dramatic weather shifts. We had a lot of floods. We've been in a drought. We had a very, very, very cold winter, and then sort of a intensely hot beginning of summer, and then kind of a temperate, the seasons have not been consistent or what you see in a lot of history of DC. And I think the trees are reacting to that. Also, depending on where you see them, it might be because of construction or because of some other things going on over there. But in terms of disease, there's also all kinds of diseases and parasites that affect a tree's health and affect a tree's life, not just lanternflies, although those are the ones I know everybody is aware of right now. But there's all kinds of parasites, and some of them are made worse by climate change. Some of them are invasive species like the lanternflies that come over and are now doing well in our climate that may not have in the past. And some of them are just species or insects or parasites that are being brought over because of things like the globalization of trade. They basically hitchhike over on a crop or on a commodity, and then they get into the environment, and now they're affecting our trees. So that is part of it too. And it's definitely something that people who care about trees are constantly fighting against. The other thing that I've heard just anecdotally has been particularly bad this year, might not be affecting all of the neighborhood trees, are deer. DC has a huge population of deer. It has been getting bigger. And a lot of young deer especially will use trees to shave their antlers or rub their antlers. And that can really affect a young tree. Sometimes they'll munch on trees. So, animals too are a feature.
Big picture here. You guys spent a long time and did a really thorough piece. I never thought I would be interested in a treescape story, but here I am. What connect this with sort of what we can learn about our city, where it's headed right now?
I think one takeaway is that Washington, D.C., because it is such a green city, and frankly, because it is known for being such a green city, people travel from all over the world to come see trees in the district. I'm thinking of the cherry blossom trees. I'm thinking of the beautiful golden ginkgo trees that line streets around here. I mean, DC really is aware of its look and feel and reputation as a green city. And I think for that reason, this idea of an existential threat is being taken incredibly seriously here in a way that it may not be quite yet in other cities, or other cities I think are trying to catch up maybe to that threat. But the district is being incredibly proactive about trying to get ahead of what it perceives to be these threats, whether that's climate change, whether that's development. And so because of that motivation to get ahead of it, to not wait for it to happen and then have to react, it's making a lot of these changes and these decisions ahead of the pace at which it might have to, just naturally. And so I think that that is something to take away, that like DC is really, really pushing this change. And there is some debate about whether that's good or bad. There are some people who are really grateful that we live in a city that is taking it so seriously and is following the science, not just at pace, but trying to get ahead of where it is. So I think that's a takeaway, and that's something that people could walk away from this piece knowing.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful too. I mean, also, one of the reasons why we did this story was, one, we wanted to explore the change in the look and the feel of like the treescape. But I think we've like walked away with a little bit more. I mean, we learned so much about trees and how resilient they can be. And I don't know, I feel like maybe like even that can be a narrative of the city itself and the people who live here, so transient. I mean, and then like the trees also moving in and just like establishing these roots. I mean, there's definitely like a lot of things that's happening, whether it's like the climate or the fungus, the different things in soil too. But from what we've learned about all of these different trees, I mean, they always just kind of like find this way to like thrive, whether it's just like slow migration or, just adapting to change. There's a lot of trees that just again, adapt really well. And that's like something that's always been stuck with me after doing this story and a couple other stories I've done on these trees. It's just kind of like this resilience that they have.
Also, I want to add one more thing that I thought of while John was talking. Like, we think about the human intervention of all of this as us saving trees from climate change, right? I think it's sort of presented that way, as like human intervention is going to make DC resilient in the face of climate change and make sure that the trees that live here will survive and do well and all of that. But I also think that one of the takeaways that I had in reporting this piece is like, yes, we are working to try to save the trees from climate change, but the trees are going to save us from climate change too. And that's part of why they're so important. Trees do the obvious things. They create shade. They take carbon dioxide out of the air. They produce more oxygen. They make a city cleaner and shadier. But they also do things like actually create a situation in the soil where it can absorb more water. So when we have these flash floods, it will help save communities from the worst effects of flash flooding. And they can also store water. So in periods of drought, there's more groundwater. They reduce the effects of heat islands. They help communities have lower rates of asthma, which is incredibly prevalent in inner city communities. Having trees is not just like cute for the city. It's existential for us too.
Play it forward a few years. If I go away, come back in 15 years, what am I going to notice is different?
I think you'll definitely notice the types of trees are different. Like John had been saying about fall foliage, if you come back in the fall, you might have to look harder to find red and purple trees. You'll probably see more trees that look more southern. You might see more evergreens. The kinds of trees that maybe you're used to seeing might not be quite as prevalent here anymore.
And gold in the fall.
Gold in the fall.
Gold in the fall.
It's the Trump era, man. Everything's gold.
Oh, no.
Hey, thank you guys so much for being here.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thank you for caring about trees, Mr. Indoorsman.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.